conversation that we'll have with the panelists. I had the opportunity to look at two of the presentations prior to coming in this morning. Actually, I looked at the one playing over the last couple of days, and I must admit, the three presentations that we've heard today, I think, are really quite stimulating for us as deans of education and for us as educators more generally. One of the things that seems to come through, and this may not everybody may not recognize themselves in what I'm about to say, and that is that to some extent, what we have been doing, and what we probably still are doing in many of our teacher education programs and many of the ways in which we support the professional formation of our university instructors, is to recreate the past. We basically recreate the way in which we were taught to actually teach the next generation of teachers, or the way in which we were taught in a university is to some extent the way in which we go about teaching our own students, whether they be in a teacher education program or, as our colleague from France indicated, in a political science classroom. So one of the things that has struck me over the last number of years, and as you can see, I'm a little bit gray, so I've been around for a long time, is that one of the things that we need to do, to some extent, is to think about how we unmake teachers, how we unmake the university professoriate. That what we need to do is not just to think about the way in which we use technology to support learning. First of all, I've come to the view that what we should be doing is not talking about teaching, but we should be talking about learning, how it is that our students actually learn. So one of the things that we probably need to do is to think about how we unmake teachers, how we unmake professors. In Professor Ria's presentation, one of the things that we saw was the way in which one courageous faculty member sought to reach out, and not just to his colleagues to learn how he should do things differently, but also to understand the way in which students themselves perhaps learn differently than what he did. But it's intriguing, I thought, as well, is that in the K-12 system, or the primary, junior, senior system, many of our students are actually engaged in active learning environments. Certainly in the primary, junior levels, that they're often engaged in active learning environments, and then we beat that out of them when they go into high school, and we beat it out of them further when they go into the university, because typically we put them into a room like this, and there's the sage on the stage who then talks at them for a number of hours, and we don't encourage them to actively engage in their own learning. So the example that Professor Ria gave, and which I see in many of my classrooms, or my professors' classrooms, is that they actually look at ways in which they can engage the students in co-shaping, co-developing the curriculum. The professor is still the knowledgeable expert, but the students themselves can actually help recreate that, or create that knowledge, and certainly using some of the design techniques that Mr. Nkusi talked about in his presentation. That's one of the ways in which we can actually do it. So the unmaking of the teacher, the unmaking of the professor is something that we need to think about. It's certainly the case when we talk about the K-12 system teaching teachers how to be teachers for the 21st century. One of the things I might talk about in a session later on this week is the way in which I'm using 4 dates to actually describe transition around teaching. The first date is 1958, the second date is 2019, the third date is 2026, and the fourth date is 2055. Those sound very differ. But 1958 is when I started school, and if you take a look at the classroom that I went to, it's very, very different than the classroom that students go into today in the K-12 system. 2019 is the class of teacher candidates that we're bringing into our concurrent education program at Brock University this year. They graduate in 2025. They will be teaching in 2055. So one of the things that I've been thinking about as the Dean of Education is how we unmake the current model of teacher education to be able to recreate that teacher for the mid-21st century, 100 years after it was that I first went to school. So what do we need to think about in that arc of that teacher's profession so that we make sure that that teacher, when she graduates, and most of our teachers are females, that teacher, when she graduates, is not just prepared for the classroom of 2025, but is also prepared for that classroom in 2055, when she will be stepping down. And one of the things that we need to think about, and certainly our first and our last presenter talked about, and that is about how we do effective professional development of our teachers. So I was really excited to listen to the discussion this morning about the what you're doing in your university in terms of e-learning, smart learning. Those are actually the directions that I think that we need to, certainly my institution, that we need to go in. We're looking at the ongoing in-service or pre-service and in-service development of our teachers. We need to look at the ways in which we shape the learning so that what they can do is effectively integrate that learning across the lifespan of their career. Teachers, if they're going to be teachers, actually also need to be learners. They need to be learners, not just before they go into the classroom, and indeed most of the teachers that I know actually do this on a regular basis, but they need to be actively engaged in the learning so that what they can do is reshape their curriculum within the ministry guidelines, of course, reshape their curriculum so that what it is relevant to the needs of the students in the classes that they're in. And one of the ways in which they can do that is engage in ongoing professional development, whether it's in the classroom or in the schools run by their boards of education or their ministries of education, or in postgraduate education, not training. We don't train teachers, by the way. The postgraduate education of those teachers through programs such as the Smart Learning, the professional development programs that you have at your institution. One of the things I thought was brilliant, and I've been talking about this at my institution, but not have been able to accomplish it yet, is the way in which you are laddering certificates to diplomas to degrees, which actually then provides for our teachers in the field pathways so that they can continuously build their own professional capabilities and then translate that into the classroom. Professor Nkusi, actually all three of our presenters talked about the ways in which we could use technologies to support learning and technology to support teaching. And I must admit, I'm gung-ho about that. Most of our students carry one of these in their pockets, and it may not be the case in all countries, but in many cases it is. And what we should be doing is looking at how we actually use these as an effective tool for student learning and for our teaching. These can actually carry most of the curriculum that we need to teach. So using things like OERs and online learning tools can actually help support learning anywhere, any place, and any time. But I also think that we should be thinking about the way in which you use advanced technologies such as we discussed this morning about AI, VR in the classroom more effectively, And I've been doing some work on AI, and one of the things that intrigues me about AI is that while we're generally accepting of it, but we're also greatly fearful of it, that if we use it effectively, it can actually support the work that teachers do in the classroom without necessarily being fearful of the robot taking the place of our teachers. That will never happen, but I think, or at least not as much as I think it would. AI can actually be a critical tool in the toolbox that teachers have to support differentiation, to support inclusiveness, to support the assessment and evaluation of students, to actually support students and nudge students as they are moving through the curriculum at different speeds. So the work that we as teachers do, usually in terms of intuitively knowing how to group students in pods to be able to teach them effectively, AI can actually help us support to do that. And because we can't be in each of those pods all the time, AI is one of those other tools that we might be able to use to help encourage learning and support learning for each and every student, no matter where that student is within her or his learning program. There's many other things that we heard this morning from each of the presenters that we need to discuss. And one of our last intervener from Cameroon did raise the issue of inequalities across the world. Those inequalities also exist within our own communities and nations. They exist between fairly rich schools within urban communities. They exist between urban and rural communities. They exist between indigenous communities in my country and non-indigenous communities. We need to look at the ways in which we really can undermine that divisiveness, that lack of diversity in many of our schools, and become a much more inclusive learning environment for each and every one of our students and each and every one of our teachers. So that's probably a long-winded comment, but when you give a dean a place to talk, the dean will talk. So thank you very much for your time, and this is
Yes.
a really impressive.
They really talk. They really talk.
Okay, now I'd like to open the floor to